It sounds silly, but you know what? The debt limit is silly. It's like saying, I had dinner somewhere and I ate everything and check comes at the end of the meal. And I say, you know what? I'm only going to pay this if you give me something else. It's absurd. It's playing Russian roulette with the U.S. economy.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is David Dayen. You guys already know he's our favorite boomer.
I am not a boomer.
Okay,
I am firmly Gen X.
Okay, they call me a boomer, David. They call me a boomer. I'm a boomer too. Anyone who's not a zoomer is a boomer.
I see. Okay.
It's just internet culture. Regardless, you're here and you're going to educate us on what's going on with this debt ceiling thing because we don't understand it. We don't know. There's a lot of people on here who have no idea what the debt ceiling is.
So let's go back to the beginning.
Yeah, let's get to the beginning of this conversation. What is a debt ceiling?
Right. So Congress appropriates money to spend all the time, whether it's on war or on Medicare or whatever it is. Congress appropriates money and says we're allowed to spend this. Obviously, almost every year in the existence of the United States, Congress does not take in as much money as as goes out. So in order to cover that spending, the U.S. borrows money. So they sell bonds to national investors, and they borrow money. For the longest time in America, every time the government wanted to borrow money, Congress had to affirmatively vote to allow that. Every bond Congress had to vote for. In 1917, Congress said, okay, you can just go do your bond selling, your borrowing operations. However, we're going to put a limit on how much you can borrow, and that is called the debt limit. And that can be raised, but only by an act of Congress. 80 times, I believe, over the last 80 years, practically like clockwork, Congress raises the debt limit to allow for more borrowing to cover the spending that they have already put in place. So, I mean, that's the important thing, right? Congress has already appropriated money, said we're going to spend money on this, and all the borrowing is paying those bills. So it's no different than you getting your credit card bill. You've already spent the money, you've already paid for the goods and services, and it's just a matter of paying those bills. About 10 years ago, Republicans had an idea, and that idea was, this is something that the country really needs to happen, because if you don't increase the debt limit, the country runs out of money, it goes into default, it would be financial calamity. So in Republican brain, they thought, this is an opportunity. This is a shot. This is a weapon. We can use this to extort things that we wouldn't normally get through the regular legislative process. Unfortunately, Barack Obama played along with that. In 2011, he said, okay, let's have a negotiation on a grand bargain to cut the deficit.
Brilliant.
He had this negotiation with John Boehner, who was the House Speaker at the time. Ultimately, it was only thanks to the Tea Party balking at more tax increases that didn't go through. What we ended up with was this sort of second order thing called the sequester, where they just cut spending across the board for years. And it actually had a really debilitating effect on the recovery from the Great Recession. Flash forward to now, and Republicans, same situation. They have the House. Democrats have the Senate. Democrats have the White House. House Republicans think, hey, great opportunity. Now we're going to hijack the government again, hijack the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, hijack the global economy, and say, you got to give us some stuff until, and that's the only way we're going to raise the debt limit. So that's where we are right now.
So what happens if we don't pay these debts?
So we go into default. Our credit rating goes down, just like if you didn't pay your credit card, right? Mm-hmm. You'd owe more money. Your interest rate would go up. You'd owe more money later. Similar thing with the government. We would owe much more money later. In the short term, what would happen? We literally don't have the money in the U.S. Treasury to pay the obligations that we have coming right now. So on June 1st, there's Social Security payments supposed to go out. Contractors get paid. There are millions of payments made almost on a daily basis to meet the obligations of the U.S. government. And some of those payments would stop. It's actually uncharted territory because the U.S. has never gone into default before. But any number of things could happen from, okay, we don't have enough money to pay everything on June 1st. So we're going to wait until revenues come in because, money comes into the federal government in taxes. We're going to wait until that money comes in. And then when that money comes in, we'll pay the June 1st bills. And then we'll wait until we get enough money to pay the June 2nd bill. So, people rely on these things, right? So that would be really catastrophic. You're talking about payments to people who work in the government. You're talking about payments to contractors. You're talking about payments like veterans benefits and Social Security payments. And you're talking about payments, reimbursements for Medicare and Medicaid. You're talking about food stamps. I mean, it's literally everything the government does that they pay for would be, imperiled, at least in the short term, until an agreement was made.
You said this is unprecedented, uncharted territory, but as far as I understand, with my limited knowledge, wasn't there maybe a similar threat launched by conservatives who were sore losers in the immediate aftermath of Civil War that created...
Well, they threatened. They threatened it. And so, after the Civil War, there were payments that were owed. The Confederates, the conservatives of their day, said, maybe we'll just obviate those payments. We won't pay them. And so in the Civil War amendments to the Constitution, one of them being the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, they put in a little proviso, and the sentence says, the validity of the public debt shall not be questioned. In other words, you can't repudiate these debts. If someone has a claim on the federal government, they're a bondholder, they're an investor, you can't repudiate that claim. So what that means for today is many people have made the argument that it is actually unconstitutional for the president to not pay off these obligations that have already been laid out by Congress. If you think about it, what it forces the president to do, if we hit that debt limit, the president will have to pick and choose what things to pay and what things not to pay. Congress is supposed to set the rules on what gets, they have the power of the purse, right? Mm-hmm. They are supposed to set the rules on what gets paid and what doesn't. But, under the debt ceiling statute, if we run out of money, the president now has to do that. And that essentially gives the president kind of a line item veto where they can say, all right, I'm going to pay this bill, but I'm not going to pay this bill. And that itself, many have said, is unconstitutional. And so there are some court cases that are actually happening right now that discuss this very idea, trying to say that the debt ceiling statute that was passed in 1917 actually violates the Constitution and should be tossed out. And so that's happening sort of in parallel to the negotiations between the president and House Republicans right now.
It's interesting you say that. Now, I'm no big city lawyer, nor am I a constitutional scholar, but it does seem like an immediate avenue for Joseph Robinette Biden to utilize. So
many have asked him to do so, and yet
I would be shocked if you were to tell me that he's that they're refusing to use that.
Right. What he said consistently is that I think I have that authority to, under the terms of the 14th Amendment, to continue to borrow and continue to pay bondholders. However, there would be litigation. It would take too long. And in the meantime, I would, we'd hit the debt ceiling, and the financial chaos that would ensue would result. And so I'm not going to do it. The problem with him saying that is that there's already litigation. There is a case in Boston, the National Association of Government Employees, which are, government workers who are threatened by hitting the debt ceiling, of not getting paid, of being fired, being furloughed. They have filed suit in federal court in Boston, and they have said that the debt ceiling is unconstitutional, and we're harmed by it if we ever hit that. In fact, we're harmed right now because what essentially has happened is we've already hit the debt ceiling. We did it back in January, and the Treasury Department, to conserve cash, has engaged in what they call extraordinary measures to try to, have enough cash to pay the bills. And one of the things that they've done is there are retirement accounts that federal government employees have, and they reinvest the benefits, the dividends and whatever of those retirement accounts. And they are not doing that right now. They are not reinvesting in those funds. And that causes a loss to those funds. And so the government employees who rely on those funds for their retirement have said, look, you're costing us money right now because you hit the debt limit. And actually, this law that created the debt limit is unconstitutional. So why don't you just get rid of it? And so that's what they're asking a federal judge to do. There's actually a hearing on this next Wednesday, which is, the day before the date. June 1st has been sort of the date everyone's working with as that's the last day that the government's going to have enough money to pay its bills.
Another question I had was, so we talked about the 14th Amendment and the Biden administration's reluctance to use anything at their disposal to combat this, even though they kind of like flashed it, as you mentioned. They flashed it as though this was a negotiations tactic, like, oh yeah, it's not gonna be a problem, because I think that was a miscalculation on their part. I think that they thought that their corporate benefactors would go back to them and be like, okay, enough with this shit. Like, you can't let the economy implode.
You don't have to think that, Hasan. They said that explicitly, that they expected corporations, banks, the kind of people that are donors to the Republican Party to go to the leaders of the Republican Party and say, knock it out, knock it off. Just don't do this anymore. You don't threaten the economy for your needs. We need to get on with business. Unfortunately for the White House, those businesses did not do that at all, and allowed.
Why do you think that's the case? I thought that the business interests would like also be on board with not imploding the economy.
There's been kind of a weird complacency on the part of corporate America about this, that this is all political talk and they'll come to a decision and they'll figure it out. So there wasn't, and indeed the Chamber of Commerce, when Biden was sort of flirting with saying, I can use the 14th Amendment, the Chamber of Commerce, which represents corporate America essentially, came out with a letter that said that would be a radical usurpation of executive power. So they have not just been non-committal, but corporations have been on the side of Republicans saying you have to strike a deal rather than use unilateral authority.
So what I don't understand about this, and there's plenty I don't understand.
Right.
Is that
tough stuff.
I guess why? Like, is it really that important for there to be cuts to discretionary spending? Obviously not the military budget, because we would never touch that.
That's magic.
Is it really that important for corporations to do that? Are they operating on this like weird libertarian strategy? Like what? I mean, I think how does it impact the broader? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the leaders of corporations are sort of ideologically conservative, and they're going along with conservative vision of limited government. If there are cuts to the discretionary spending budget, do you know what some of those cuts would be on? The regulatory agencies that deal with corporations. They would be happy with cuts to food inspection and financial regulators and environmental regulators. That would be great for corporations. They could pollute with impunity. They could swindle people with impunity. So I mean, I think that's also part of it.
So this goes beyond Kevin McCarthy just trying to do the classic, Boehner, or even the classic Mitch McConnell move of like obstruction without a real purpose, simply for the sake of obstruction. But it's actually to make so the demands that Kevin McCarthy has put forward with respect to cuts to discretionary spending are very real ones that you're saying corporate America also is on board with. They definitely want.
I mean, to an extent. I mean, I think from McCarthy's perspective, the 2011 precedent is that the debt ceiling is a loaded gun that is sitting on the table. And so why not pick it up and point it at the Democrats and say, what are you going to give me for me not to shoot you and the global economy along with it? I mean, that's really how you have to look at this. It's an extortion attempt. Yeah.
Let's talk about what other things that the Democrats could have done that they failed to do. Because if I recall correctly, Tim Kaine in the membrane, came out and criticized the Democratic Party and said, why didn't we knew that this was going to inevitably happen. Why didn't we utilize the lame duck time frame that we could have to actually deal with this when we had the numbers to deal with it?
It's the worst kept secret on earth that Republicans were going to use the debt limit for their ideological ends. Like, they did not make a secret of this at all. Before the 2022 election, they were saying things like, "Oh yeah, we think this is a good idea. This is a way for us to stop this runaway spending." They said it over and over and over and over again. And there really weren't any defectors from that. It was the entire Republican Party that was saying, we are going to use this tool if we get the chance. Forget about just in the lame duck session of 2022. Going back to 2011, when this happened before and almost strangled the economy, Democrats at every step of the way, whether they were in the minority and this, ending the debt limit could have been their ask, or whether they had, the full control of the U.S. government and could have done it on their own, they could have taken steps to, either raise the debt limit to a bajillion, cajillion dollars, raise it to a number like Denmark. Denmark is the only other industrialized nation that even has a debt limit like this, and they have it at an impossibly high number that they'll never reach. So it's never a problem. So they could have done that, or they could have just said, there was an old rule in the 1980s called the Gephardt rule. It was named after Dick Gephardt, who was minority leader for a time, majority leader actually of the House of Representatives, Democrat. And his rule was that every time Congress passes a budget, they inherently say, we're going to raise the debt limit to cover the spending in that budget. So there would not be a separate vote ever. It would just be a budget vote. And every year Congress passes a budget unless the government shuts down. And so that would be an automatic way. It would essentially end the debt limit as a concern forever. So they could have done that. So they could have done a number of things. Reconciliation, there's this whole thing where you need 60 votes, et cetera, et cetera. But the budget reconciliation process can be used to increase the debt limit.
Of course.
It was done in the 1980s and 90s.
Of course, if that was an avenue that the Democrats would go down, we would have still had the same villains in the Democratic Party that could have potentially also posed the threat to utilizing the budget reconciliation.
Well, it's why they didn't. I mean, they
Kirsten
said
Sinema, Joe Manchin, Bob Menendez, Maggie Hassan, yada, yada, yada. So, so the Democratic Party sucks. We already know that. They, at a certain point, at least, maybe from what you're saying, I'm just finding out about all of this, David, just now from you. It kind of seems like the Democratic Party is, at least when you look at the way that they have acted or reacted or refused to act consistently, it almost seems like they don't care if austerity measures are implemented. And, they are, even when they are in a position of power to do something, it feels like it's better for the Republicans to react and force austerity measures so that they can just, throw their hands at the side and say, oh, we just had to preserve the sanctity of these institutions. Right. And
well, you have to say
there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, I mean, you have to say there's some complicity there, certainly on the part of the Democrats. Now, let's talk about what is on the table, what we're actually talking about in this deal, which seems to be pretty close at this point. So it looks like they're going to essentially freeze federal spending at the current level for the non-defense discretionary budget. The defense budget will rise. So, that's magic spending.
Wait, what?
Doesn't count. Exactly. It doesn't count. Nobody, you can't, you got to support troops, right? So that's going to go up. But the non-defense discretionary budget, which is kind of everything else. By the way, also not Social Security, not Medicare, not Medicaid. That's all mandatory spending.
Yeah.
This is discretionary spending where Congress can say, okay, we'll choose not to do this. It's really a tiny part of the budget. It's only about 13% of the overall U.S. budget is in the non-defense discretionary side of the ledger. And they're going to freeze that spending. Now, we have inflation right now. So if you have $100 today and you have $100 next year, you're actually cutting your purchasing power, right? Because inflation has gone up 4%, 5%. So in real terms, it's a cut, but it's a freeze of that spending. for the next 2 years with a nominal like 1% increase in the second year. It's not as bad as they were asking for. Republicans were asking for a 10-year cap. So we've gone from 10 years to 2, which is actually really massive in terms of the actual impact of this. If the caps go away in 2 years, and if Democrats, get a majority again in the House, then they can raise the budget again.
That is, of course, if we're operating on the basis that like there was nothing else the Democrats could have done other than negotiate with these terrorists who are holding a gun to the head of the American economy and the global economy in general.
Absolutely. As soon as you started negotiating, you were going to get a bad deal. And this is a bad deal. And I don't want to sugarcoat it in any way, but relative to what we were hearing before, it's actually gotten a fair bit better. Now, let's talk about some of the other things that are in this deal. In order to cover some of that discretionary spending so it's even from the last fiscal year to the next one, they're going to take money that was given under the Inflation Reduction Act to the Internal Revenue Service. The IRS was given $80 billion over 10 years to modernize its operations, to actually answer the phone, to hire enough people, and also to audit the rich, which the IRS hasn't been doing very often lately.
I don't like that.
Right. Well, Republicans really don't like that. I mean, maybe you don't like it either, but Republicans really don't like it.
No, I love it.
They have yelled about, there are going to be 87,000 IRS agents running around, poking into all your financial records, et cetera. So
well, they thought that they were going to come with guns to their houses, like the 87,000 armed IRS. They weren't going to be nerd number crunchers. Yeah. They're coming for your jet ski.
So anyway, in this deal, as we've heard about it, $10 billion of that $80 billion would be taken away. And here's how ridiculous this is. If you take $10 billion away from the IRS, you're taking away the ability for them to collect revenue.
Yeah.
You're actually adding to the deficit. This is supposed to be all about deficit reduction, but you're actually going to add to the deficit by taking that money away from the IRS.
Yeah, I don't get it. Isn't that, every dollar spent on the IRS is actually returning more dollars to the American government's coffers, right? So how does that work?
About $6 for every dollar.
Huh.
So here are these fiscally responsible Republicans who have demanded that we increase the deficit by making it easier for rich people to cheat on their taxes. That's part of this deal. Another thing that's part of this deal is clawing back unspent COVID relief money. So there's about $30 billion out there that hasn't been spent. However, it was earmarked for programs like making a universal vaccine so that the next coronavirus pandemic would maybe not happen. So it's a little short-sighted to take away this COVID aid. That's another part of the deal. Another part of the deal is changes to the permitting process for large infrastructure. And it seems like Democrats are making it a little easier to put together transmission lines so you can get renewable energy from where it's produced to where it's consumed easier. But Republicans in exchange make it a little easier to permit fossil fuel infrastructure like pipelines and oil drilling and things like that. So we're going to pollute the earth as part of this emerging deal. And then the last thing, which is actually probably the thing that's most in flux right now, is increasing what are called work requirements for federal benefit programs like TANF, which is the welfare program, temporary assistance for needy families, and also the SNAP program, supplemental nutrition assistance program, sometimes it's called food stamps. The only reason that you would increase work requirements so that someone has to work 30 hours a week in order to get this food aid is it's really a way to kick people off the program because it's a hassle, it's complicated, you got to fill out these forms. It's a way to lower the rolls on nutrition assistance. So these are people who can't afford food or who just need generalized assistance to live. Part of this deal is we're going to kick some of those people off of their benefits. So that's what the emerging deal is. And none of it is what any sane person would actually do. But Republicans are essentially holding a gun to the head of the U.S. economy, the global economy, and saying, you got to do this.
Well, we gotta do something about these working poors. You know,
Right.
they've had it far too good for far too long.
Exactly.
Unemployment is at an all time low, and yet we're still unrolling. You know, at the state level, at least in Republican states. Child labor protections so that we can, I guess, have a fresh new resource of children who should be working in the factory floors instead of, you know, protecting them against such predation and exploitation. What could be the possible reason as to why Republicans want this to happen? Is it just like pure malicious awfulness? Is cruelty the point here, or is there like not legitimate, but what is the reason as to why they would want to kick people off of SNAP coverage with work requirements when you know, these people are already working in many instances? So you're just like increasing the hours that they need to work, right?
Yeah. The way they've talked about it is saying, you know, we have a workforce problem. We need to make our economy
Do
grow.
we
We
have
need
a
to put
workforce problem? Let me just ask you that.
We absolutely do not. I mean, we have, I mean, to an extent, we have a shortage in some industries of available workers, but changing the rules around welfare and food stamps isn't going to change that. These are, you know, largely skilled jobs that we're looking for new workers on, like construction and advanced manufacturing and things like that. And just this isn't going to make a dent in that. It's not intended to. I mean, the what they say versus what they mean is what you have to pay attention to here. What they say is we got to get America back to work. What they mean is we think poor people who are being paid not to work, in their words, have it too good, and we're gonna shut them off from their benefits. I mean, that's the goal here.
I mean, this is very frustrating stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of seems shitty that the Democratic Party, which made a lot of promises and was very well received by a lot of people, especially on Twitter and the mainstream media circles, as like the new FDR, kind of seems like that is fallen apart dramatically,
I mean,
in a spectacular fashion.
We put together this whole pop-up welfare program during the pandemic. We paid people, you know, this super unemployment. We gave people stimulus checks. We helped people in an hour of need so they could stay home and stay healthy. And we even increased the child tax credit, if you remember, at the
Yeah,
end
which
of
which eviscerated
2020.
child poverty.
Yeah, it cut
Very
it in half.
bad. I hated that. The children yearn for the mines. Have you thought about the
All
fact that the kids would develop important skills in the mines, though?
It is true. They learn about teamwork.
Yeah.
But you know, all of that stuff that I just talked about went away. All of it has been rolled back. We're seeing
It was so good that Mitt
there's
Romney was on board with it, right? Sorry to cut you off, but
the
like it
child
was,
tax credit. Yes,
yeah.
he's put forward proposals on that. We're seeing right now there was an extension previously during the pandemic of getting people on Medicaid so that they had some form of health insurance during the middle of a pandemic. That is being rolled back as we speak, and millions of people are losing their Medicaid coverage, losing their health insurance. And all of these safety net programs that were put in place for the pandemic, and all of us said, you know, this is like a normal country where that protects you in case of calamity. All of those have been taken away. It's really depressing. And even if you think, oh well, they made the best of a bad situation with this debt ceiling deal, if you look at it sort of, you know, in a holistic way, the way that the welfare supports in this country have went up and then like a rubber band snapped right back down to where they were is really staggering.
I mean, it pairs along perfectly well with like how much of a freak out we saw from small business owners, Chamber of Commerce, when they thought that they could not fulfill some of these roles in restaurants, for example. And there was like probably 7,000 New York Times articles about how nobody wants to go to work anymore. And all of
And
that was signaling.
that's why we saw that child labor laws like being changed in certain red states. And that's why they cut unemployment early, because they wanted to push people back to the mines.
And it didn't work. That was the other,
because
it didn't even work.
people are
They cut
fed up with those jobs. They have more opportunity to get the kinds of jobs that actually respect them and give them a little bit of dignity. And those Mick jobs, working at fast food or working in the service sector are just soul crushing, and people weren't going to take it anymore.
Where do you foresee this going? So what's your speculation? So the Democrats are going to do what Joe Biden has done in the past when Ryan Grimes talked about this extensively, he wrote about it.
Right.
The sidestepping of Harry Reid in 2012 when the Democrats did have the power in their hands to literally not to let the Bush era tax cuts on the wealthy expire, and Joe Brandon gave them that personally. He's doing a similar thing now, even though it doesn't seem like he originally intended it.
It's not as bad as 2012.
I was going to say, it doesn't seem like he also intended it to happen this way. Yeah. Like, I do think that I
think what happened is they didn't think McCarthy was going to get his act together and pass a bill. They never believed that McCarthy would be able to unify his caucus so that they could put something on the table as a counterpoint to the Biden budget. When they did, I think they weren't prepared for any kind of plan B. And then they started negotiating. Now, the negotiation doesn't seem as bad as it was in 2012, but it's still not great, right? And it's still unnecessary. If they would have used their inherent authority under the various things that we talked about. There are even other things that they could have done.
I was going to say there's a coin.
Mint the coin.
Do you want to elaborate on that?
There's an obscure law that says that the Treasury Department can mint a platinum coin of any denomination. And using this law, they could have conceivably made $1 trillion coin and put it into the Federal Reserve and thereby pay down bills based, from that. It sounds silly, but you know what? The debt limit is silly. I mean, the debt limit is ridiculous. Almost no country has this. It's like saying I rang up a bill. I had dinner somewhere and I ate everything, and the check comes at the end of the meal, and I say, you know what? I'm only going to pay this if you give me ice cream. I'm only going to pay this if you give me something else. It's absurd. It's playing Russian roulette with the U.S. economy and the global economy. So for some reason, the media sees certain things as silly and certain things as very serious.
Give me if I'm wrong here, but it sure seems like Democrats are, I don't know, it seems like Democrats are more worried about possibly not giving Republicans this weapon down the line if they utilize whether the minting of the coin or the 14th Amendment, because that would effectively destroy this debt limit conversation in its entirety, because then you would have established precedent and there would never be a weapon that they could utilize like this ever again.
I mean, let's just explain how crazy this is. We're having this negotiation, and it's all the things I talked about: cuts to spending, work requirements, clawing back COVID aid. In exchange, they're going to raise the debt limit for 2 years. That's it. So in 2 years, they could come right back, and we'll have this happen all over again. You think about this like a hostage negotiation. It's like, you paid the ransom, you get the hostage release, but in 2 years, thugs are going to come and kidnap the hostage again, and then you're going to have to pay another ransom. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. And yet that's what we're faced with until someone in a position of power uses the authority that appears to be available to say, we're not doing this anymore.
Wow. Doesn't seem like Biden is going to be that someone, which I'm shocked. I mean, I thought he was Dark Brandon, but it doesn't. He doesn't seem to be that guy.
Median Brandon. Yeah, he's in the middle.
Okay, so what do we do here? Where do we go from here? I mean, how do we get the Democratic Party, in your mind, to actually stop reacting to the insanity that is the Republican Party, the purposeful, destructive behavior that they engage in? How do we get them to do the right thing? And also, what are some of the internal forces, in your opinion, within the Democratic Party that's like operating this way? Are there truly no Democrats out there who want to be like, for example, the Minnesota State Democratic Party?
Yeah.
Which has gotten a lot done with a incredibly narrow majority in the Senate, a tremendous amount, which, by the way, the Democratic governor, Tim Walz, also vetoed the Uber and Lyft version of that.
I mean, even he's not Dark Waltz, right? But I mean, I think often Democrats don't think about these sort of structural forces, these ways that they can use to their advantage. And what we're seeing here is that Republicans certainly have no problem using these little quirks in our system to their own ideological ends. Democrats had the debt limit available to them during Trump. The debt limit was increased 3 times during the Trump administration. At no time was it used to repeal the Trump tax cuts or to institute various regulations or anything like that. I'm not saying it should have been that way, but I'm saying that there's a disproportionality between how Republicans see these things and how Democrats see these things. And that disparity explains a lot of frustration, I think, from the Democratic rank and file.
That's interesting. Like you said, it almost feels like the Democrats don't care. It almost feels like the Democrats don't want to do these things. I don't know. Am I crazy?
Well, I think that Democrats in Washington are obsessed with seeming responsible. They want to be patted on the back in a David Brooks op-ed. They see that as central to their being. They are the responsible guys. They are the adults in the room, and they're not going to take actions that threaten that self-image as responsible. Now, to me, the responsible thing to do when you have a legislative terrorist tell you, give me all your money or the economy gets it, the responsible thing to do to that is say, I'm not going to negotiate, right? I mean, that would be the responsible thing in my belief, and I'm going to use every avenue of my power so that I'm not in a hijacking situation. But that isn't the road that they took. And now, even if you say, well, this could have been worse, it's not great, but it looks like for 2 years they've got some breathing room. That's still not the place where they could have been if they followed the proper steps and used every avenue of their power. And one interesting thing, our good friend Ron DeSantis, he announced for president this week, right? And there was an interview where he said, I've looked at the Constitution, I've looked at the authorities that the executive has, and I'm looking forward to getting my hands on them because I think I can use them to a degree that really takes back this country, yada, yada, yada. But the point is that that's what he's focused on, right? Looking at every avenue to make progress. This is something, years ago, before Biden became president, during the Trump administration, we wrote this series called the Day One Agenda with all of these things that could have been done without congressional authority. Like Congress has already given the authority to the president to undertake a number of actions. And if you go to Day One Agenda, type that into prospect.org, you can find this whole series of all the things that Biden could have done. And he's done about a third of them, which isn't bad, but it also, it just doesn't show that it's his main focus, right? And I think for someone like DeSantis and for someone like Trump, who has said, next time if I get in there, I'm not going to fuck around. I'm going to get rid of all the bureaucrats that are in the deep state, et cetera. They're looking at executive power as the way forward to put their agenda into practice. They're not looking at Congress. And I feel like Democrats don't think that way.
I mean, I don't know if they don't think that way or if they are also beholden to the same corporate benefactors that the Republicans are. So therefore, they can portray themselves as progressive legislators whenever they are not in power. My mind always goes back to Kamala Harris being a champion for Medicare for all under the Trump administration when the Democrats had no power whatsoever. And then when push came to shove and when election time came around, there were 2 people who were advocating for Medicare for all, and the rest of the Democratic primary field directly joined the fight specifically to bomb that. And now when they are in power, all they do is block any kind of progressive legislation from happening. I don't think it's because they're like rugged institutionalists who keep getting owned over and over again. I think they're deliberately bad. I think they are designed to to lose, because ultimately when they lose, it's out of their hands. It's always out of their hands. It's the Republicans that are ruining this country. It's not them, even though they do have the power to do something about it and refuse to do it. And it's always like, oh man, I guess we flubbed it again. It sucks. And the media absolutely allows them to play that role by not holding them accountable in the way that American Prospect does, for example. They just say, oh yeah, well, what are the Democrats supposed to do? And everyone champions that and repeats that line over and over again. And we play this song and dance as the Republican Party eviscerates the working poor.
And what frustrates me, Hasan, is, at the beginning of this administration, they passed a $1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan, which had the increase in the child tax credit in it, which had $1,200 checks or $1,400, and they were supposed to be $2,000, et cetera. It was a big bill, right? They passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which wasn't everything, but it does negotiate drug prices in Medicare. It does create a number of investments to mitigate climate change. They've done these things and been praised for them in the past. And you would think that they would say, hey, when we work together and when we actually get certain things done, people like us, right? This could be a way forward, actually doing things for the benefit of the American people, actually delivering for them. And yet we see Democrats fall back into these patterns of behavior, maybe because of, not wanting to rock the boat from a corporate perspective, maybe because they want to just be the responsible guys and not the wild-eyed crazies like us on the left. For whatever reason, they don't seem to understand the power of making progress and what that shows to the American people.
Yeah, I think that they're doing it deliberately. It's by design. That's why there's always a rotating villain that never gets punished and is celebrated and cherished. And then that's how you arrive at people who are even short-sighted, in my opinion, like Kirsten Sinema, who will get the bag thrown at her for a one-off. And instead of having like a long career in Congress over the course of many, many years, as she was given an opportunity no Green senator is ever given. And I don't mean Green as in like Green Party, even though she was a part of that back in the day. I mean like a new freshman senator getting the opportunity of a lifetime to put her name on a bipartisan 1.9 trillion was a massive infrastructure spending bill, and then only to turn around and destroy the Biden agenda over and over again, and then becoming an independent. Or running, or again as an independent, that to me signals that the Democratic Party is engaging in malicious incompetence. This negligence is by design, rather than trying to, I guess, protect the institutions, because institutionalists, which I believe that there are many in the Democratic Party, like actual ones, not the ones that not like the Republican Party, who uses every and any avenue they can to get their bidding, even if they can rule as a minority and quite literally enact an agenda that is unpopular, that the overwhelming majority is actually not on board with, and even
everything I just told you about, increasing work requirements, all of the things,
or even abortion
is going into this bill. It's unpopular.
And even things that the media actually punishes them on, because the media will not really punish the Republican Party for work requirements because they are an arm of capital, but they will actually talk about abortion as a deeply undesirable and deeply unpopular,
or book banning or something.
Yeah, book banning, abortions, things of that nature. And they still do it because they can do it, because they've completely sidestepped the federal legislative body and are utilizing state legislatures and the court system all the way up to the Supreme Court that they've packed with reactionary judges and justices. So they get away with that, which inevitably erodes these supposed institutions that the institutionalists care about. And if you truly were someone who is a institutionalist who wants to defend the sanctity of the American government and regular political process, you would do something about it. So it leads me to believe that they are not real institutionalists and they don't care about it. They just care about getting the bidding, doing the bidding of their corporate masters. Which are the same corporations and the wealthy that pay the Republican Party as well as the Democratic Party.
I mean, you're not going to put me in the position of defending the Democratic Party. I'm just not going to go there.
Yeah, no,
Uh,
I know. I'm just trying to figure it out. I'm just asking questions. I'm completely oblivious to
you're
everything.
doing your own research. Yeah.
Yeah, but David, thank you so much for coming and informing
All right.
everybody. Is there anything you'd like to promote?
Sure. So, we've been covering this whole debt ceiling thing at prospect.org with a daily newsletter that you can sign up for. It'll come to your inbox, and we're doing it as long as there's still an issue here. Until there's a resolution, we're going to be doing this newsletter. It's called X date. The X date is the term that's used to say this is the date at which Treasury will run out of money. So we call the newsletter X Date. It's a daily newsletter. And if you go to prospect.org, you can sign up for it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much,
All right,
David.
great. Thanks
Thank
a
you
lot,
for
man.
coming on.